Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another of Land Effects webinar. Um, as you guys start pouring in here, we welcome you. My name is Jake. I'll be moderating this webinar for you. We got a great little discussion going on today on wish list items. Jeremiah is going to be our presenter and showing you some really cool things. What better man to do it than he? He's the creator of all of this stuff, and based off of all these wish list items. So, a few house cleaning items, real quick. If you've seen that Q&A button, go ahead and click that. This is going to be very, very important for today's webinar. We want to get your guys' questions. Use the chat window for any comments and just chatting amongst yourselves. We'd love to hear, your guys' favorite tools and functions and things that maybe you've even helped throw into the system. That's always fun to see. So use that for the chat. And then any questions you guys have, any suggestions you guys have, all those are going to be going through that Q&A box so that we can try and address those as they come up. And not only live address those, but really hold on to those for future wish list items. So it's going to be really, really important. You guys have us live today to discuss this stuff, and it should be a really good time. So, Jer, without any further ado, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Well, sounds great. Thanks, Jake. Yeah, everyone, let's talk about wish list, shall we? Let's see what we got. This is us, of course. Like Jake said, I'll be running this little PowerPoint for about 20-25 minutes, and then we're going to switch over to CAD, and Jake is going to show some things, and we'll go from there. Our basic agenda is first, I thought I would walk you through our wish list process. Basically, how does something go from a user suggestion to a completed feature? And I have a really good example project to show that process. And then also thought it'd be kind of fun to give you a little peek of what were some other kind of prominent sort of wish list things that is scheduled to come out this year. So this webinar is going to give you a chance to kind of peek behind the curtain in multiple ways and see what we have coming. And but then we're going to switch over to CAD. This webinar has a little bit of a unique format in that we're reserving the last 30 minutes for your wish list ideas. We're going to be in CAD and they'll be streaming in, and so feel free to start throwing in some of your favorite wish list ideas into the Q&A now, but you got about 20-25 minutes before we do switch over to CAD, and we'll start really addressing those and kind of showing you how we really vet those wish list ideas and all that. So I'm hoping this will be exciting for you, and I'm going to end my PowerPoint with some tips on how you can maintain your wish list. Specifically, obviously the hope is that we would actually engineer a wish list suggestion, right? So I'm going to give you some tips on what can best cause that. So let's get going, shall we? What is our wish list process, which is basically our development process? But obviously, by being a wish list, these are ideas and requests that come from users. So let's say a user is talking to Jake on the phone and they have a great idea, and he goes, that is a good idea. So he's going to write that down in his little dev ideas. This is a screenshot here of our FreedCamp interface. We use FreedCamp, which is a web-based project management system that we love, and it works really well for this. So that wish list will begin here in dev ideas, and then we have these monthly development meetings. And so at one of those meetings, Jake might say, hey, this idea that so and so had was pretty good. I want to get it kicked up to the official wish list, say for irrigation planting. See how it's all broken up. And so we talk about it, and then it will get upgraded to the official wish list. And then from there, it needs to get more mocked up and planned. And then at yet another monthly meeting, we will decide what gets kicked up to these top priorities. We organize them by quarter, and we found that just works a lot better than monthly, because too often with development, things would need to shift to the next month. And so we were spending way too much time just moving things to next month. And organizing it by quarter has just been really fantastic. And so you see, we've sort of built these little firewalls in. And the main reason I'll actually be able to kind of show a little more. But basically, the the main thing is we can't have every imaginable user idea just go on to the wish list. The main reason being that it would get too unwieldy. The goal is pretty simple, right? The goal is we want to engineer high value wish list items. So what is a high value wish list item? So there's a lot of discussion and things that happen. Um, and I was trying to think, as I'm preparing for this webinar, I'm like, well, what is that equation to determine the value? you know, and I don't know. I just have questions. And so these are a lot of the questions that I will say at our development meetings. And I recommend, again, you sort of vet your own wish list with questions like these, if not exactly these. But the first is very simple. How many people have requested it? If one user requested something, it's not really going to go anywhere, because obviously that's a very good indicator of value. Do multiple people want it? Now, it doesn't, have to have that. Obviously, if one user suggests something that we all agree is a great idea, that's different. But there is something to be said for multiple people, requesting something. I'll also be curious, is there a viable workaround? How much time is someone going to waste without us engineering this feature? Is there this great time savings? And speaking of engineering, how easy is it going to be to engineer? Now, obviously, for someone who's not a computer programmer, it may be difficult to guess how much it'll take to engineer something. But, obviously, a great example is like photometrics. We would have many users say, gosh, I really wish you could do photometrics with land effects. And, I would just kind of give them a blank stare, because they're like, well, I mean, you realize what that's going to take to engineer, right? We're going to need the photometric data from every manufacturer and every model option of light fixtures, and all the mathematics to bring that together. Obviously that's a huge engineering task. But, at the other end of the spectrum is really more my point is, though, is something that's very easy to engineer. I would rather just engineer it rather than talk about it. It can literally be faster to just engineer something than to literally write it down and prioritize it. And then another one is if there's any sort of artificial deadline. Sometimes people need a certain feature to complete a very large project. Or in our case, sometimes one of our usage techs will have a power tip scheduled. And they go, gosh, it'd be really neat if this feature could get engineered for my power tip. So, that does come into the equation too. But then most importantly, and I'm going to be able to show this right now, but does it have a mock-up? And that, you might be like, well, what the heck is a mock-up? Well, that's really what I'm going to show you here. With this example. We're going to go through this example. This was a very recent feature that came from user requests and is now a live feature in Land Effects. The idea is very, very simple. Slopes. You want to be able to define a slope area and have the ground cover quantity be adjusted by that slope percentage, right? It's a very, very simple idea. Well, how does that go from an idea to being an actual feature in the software? Well, it got elevated to the wish list. This is actually a current screenshot of the wish list. I didn't bother putting it back on there. So it was on here. There was a little item on here somewhere that said, have the ground covers affected by slope. And so here it was with all these other items on the wish list, basically fighting to get done. And at those monthly meetings, we look at this wish list. We're like, well, which one of these is most important? Or, and that's where that equation comes in. Is any of these easier to engineer than the other, and so on? But anyway, what happened was at one of those meetings, Amanda took it upon herself and she said, hey, I really think we should do this slope thing. So she starts developing that Freed-Camp entry for calculating the slopes. And so she meets with me, and this entry in Freed-Camp just starts building. There's all this correspondence going back and forth. But key is, I just want to point out, is this was right about 2 years ago. Is when that started happening. And this goes on, and over months there's back and forths, and you can see at this point she's now crafted a notional dialog box that, she goes, I think it's going to be something like this, and it's going to involve this dialog box, which actually slowed it down a bit more, because now it's actually going to be more difficult to engineer if it needs a custom dialog box. And so there's yet more back and forth. So you can see, over a year has gone by. And around this time, a user chimed in. One of the users who was, kept saying, yeah, we deal with these slopes, and that would be really great to have those quantities be accurate. And he happened to send in this mock-up. And we were looking at this and we go, that's really great. It was very similar to what we were thinking. These are the kind of obvious elements. Is, we need a polyline that defines the extents of that slope area and some way of identifying what the slope is inside of that area. But there's still a lot missing, of course, because you can see there's the existing slope callouts, and those were a lot of my questions. Was, well, I mean, are these connected? Do you have to have that one to generate this one? Do they update at the same time? What happens when you delete that one? And so on. I mean, there's still so many things that need to get figured out, but this does really spur us. And we go, it's been over a year. We've been going back and forth on this. Let's just get this done. So we schedule a meeting. And this is where we have one of those breakout meetings, and just let's make some decisions. And the key decision we make is we need to move this mock-up forward. How does this tool operate? What does it actually create in CAD? How do you edit it once it's in CAD? I mean, it just, like I said, it just goes on and on and on to really define what this new feature should be. So we have yet more back and forth with that until we finally have a real viable mock-up that we're all in agreement on. We like the color variation between the different slope areas. We like that M leader block and call out that we've come up with. And we've come up with the official layer it should be placed on and the block names. Basically, everything's pretty much ready to engineer at this point. But it's not, because there's still back and forth on, are we doing this as a new button? And there was yet more back and forth on that. Are we saying that there's a new button for slope area separate from the slope callout? And so we have more back and forth on that until finally, okay, Amanda, she says she's swayed, and we update the master list with, okay, this is how the tool is going to operate. And so now it can get engineered, and it gets engineered in basically a day. And after engineering is obviously testing. So testing notes, a little more back and forth on some testing, making sure the quantities in every possible test, look good. We have a little bit on the units of that, but that's irrelevant. But anyway, so it gets done, but now we go, well, heck, now that it's done, and I hope you can see that okay, but you can see right here where it says slope callout and area. So because now that one button does two things, we decided it should be called slope callout and area. But now that it can affect planting and irrigation quantities, we now go, well, heck, I think we should duplicate it in both the planting and irrigation ribbons. So we have to have a discussion of that, and that impacts that. But yet there's still one more step. Oh my gosh. How about the power tip? It needs a power tip to show it off. And so then, now it it goes over to the power tip meeting, and Amanda picks her slot of that due date. So that is the power tip coming up in May that will show off this new slope callout for the area. And but in fact, it is in the software now, if you happened to notice that in the little update notice. And in fact, we're going to be able to show this. So we're going to jump over to CAD and show you how it worked. But I've one last comment on this. Like I said, that was about 2 years it took for that to go from a wish list to being done. And here's since I'm the developer and you're here, I'm going to share this with you. This code on the left, this is our existing code for calculating the area of a hatch inside of CAD. So anytime Land Effects needs to calculate the area of a hatch, this is the code that fires. And what was necessary for slope affected quantities was this bit of code here in the right in the middle, which is very, very simplistic. You're not supposed to go, oh yeah, of course, but basically it just, given that area that it calculated, it then looks through the slope areas. If the hatch is inside of one of them, it then grabs the slope multiplier for that slope area and multiplies the area quantity times the slope multiplier. It's literally that simple. In fairness, okay, yes, to get those slope areas required these two helper functions, but still, this is not a lot of code. These two helper functions and this primary code here took about 2 hours to write. And so just saying that, that to me is the big takeaway, both for ourselves and also for you, is what made this valid, very valid wish list item take 2 years to get engineered was that it never had that plan. It never had that complete mock-up of how the heck it's going to happen. That was literally the only thing that kept holding it back, because it was very simple to engineer. So anyway, so that was a fun little example of seeing a feature go from just that, from wish list to a completed feature. So what else is on that old wish list? Well, I can share with you some of the bigger items that are pending for this year. And some of these are, since we're already through the first, quarter, some items are already done. So like that slope call out area. Also, we have moved in the schematic irrigation and the circuiting to a palette. That is done. It's in advanced testing. So we're going to be able to show that to you live. You'll be the first users ever to see this feature. We're also going to show you our new web-based plant search dialog box. So that too, a lot of people had some many wish list items regarding our plant searching and the plant database. So I'm going to show that to you. That there too, you'll be the first people to see. That is not yet published. Some of the other things we're working on for this year, a lot of people have been requesting more tools for grading. So we have a new grading palette scheduled. We're going to be adding a color picker to site amenities. We're going to be redoing our true color selection across the whole software. We're also going to redo all of our schedules, addressing a huge number of wish list requests across all schedules all at once. So that's going to be a fun summer. We got some integrations with some plant database providers. We're also revising our irrigation spray symbols. That's a good example of something that's more on the content side. Obviously, very little development. It's all those thousands of symbols that need to be created. We're updating the photo callout, and we're also going to look at our entire hatch library and kind of revise it across the board. But this is, it covers a lot, but in fact, we're kind of at our pre-launch development cycle. I mean, I hate to, say the word COVID, everyone's like, well, in a COVID reality, but, but honestly, in this COVID reality of no trade shows, we are doing a lot of development. So normally Q3 and Q4 have very little development that happen. So just saying that we have a lot of room left in our calendar for this year. So we want to hear some of your wish list ideas. And I have some tips for that, more for outside of this webinar. For outside of this webinar, here are some tips for how you can maintain your wish list in a fashion so that we might actually implement it, right? Because that's the hope, right? You wish for something because you want it to happen, not because you just want to wish for it until the day you die, right? So the first is, I mean, I guess it's a little obvious, but you do need to actually send us the wish list. um, I know it's silly to have to say, but I just will admit I've had so many interactions with users at trade shows and things, and they go, oh, I really wish Land Effects would do blah blah blah, and I go, you have to actually tell us that in order for us to know. So please send your wish list items to us. You're welcome to. But now we're going to get to what exactly did you send us? Did you send us a bulleted list of ideas? It's in no particular order. At the simplest, I would ask that you prioritize your wish list. That really helps us. I mean, I hope I showed, we have all of these hundreds and hundreds of ideas from thousands of users, and we've got to triage it. And so we need you to triage your own wish list before you send it to us. But I showed also how important those mock-ups were. It kind of reminds me of a story. I have a friend who works in the film industry, and he has this saying that an idea is worthless. It's just it's obviously kind of a joke idea, but he's saying you can say, oh, I have an idea for a movie where Godzilla and King Kong fight. Um, how much is that idea worth? Well, obviously the idea is technically worthless, but you write a script. Now it's worth money, right? So the idea is you got to mock something up, and usually it's in CAD because usually that's what it relates to. Is you want the schedule to look differently. Well, mock that up in CAD and send that to us. Or if you have an idea for a new or revised dialogue box, you can draw that in Photoshop or on a cocktail napkin. I don't care, but was there some effort applied to think out how this idea will actually take form? And then, like I mentioned, is this something that multiple people have agreed that is a great idea? We do have a forum on our website. You're welcome to post. There's a wish list area. You can post on there and see if some other people will chime in. Because when it comes down to it, that's our first cross check. Is this something that multiple people want? Or is this something just personal preference of one user? And if it's just that, we really gotta, we're gonna not prioritize it, quite simply. I mean, it's gotta be one heck of an idea if it's only coming from just one person and we can't get any other buy-in on it. And so these are just the things I would recommend. But that all being said, we have the rest of this webinar to address any of your wish list ideas. So now's a great time for you to start throwing them into the Q&A box, because we are going to switch over to CAD. First, we're going to show, like I said, those three brand new features that no one else has seen. So we're going to show the slope area callout. We're going to show the schematic irrigation palette and the circuiting palette. And we're also going to show the new plant search dialog box. Just very quickly, this isn't intended to be an in-depth thing, but just to kind of show some new things, because why not? This is the webinar to show them. And then we're going to hear from your ideas. So let's get Jake to take the screen here, and we'll jump into CAD and show some things off.
Awesome. Yeah, just a reminder, guys, start typing those questions. We had one come in just briefly, Courtney saying she's excited to see the actual schematic and circuiting stuff, which I agree, it will be very cool. But to kind of lead out of what Jared was talking about, in regards to mocking things up and testing things out. This was our, if that looks familiar to the screenshot that was in his PowerPoint, just really quickly, as we started developing, how this would actually function, what you're going to notice here is all of this stuff is literally just line work and text and circles and hatches. Like nothing is actually functioning at this point. The really important takeaway is, as we've started, creating these mock-ups from people's requests that have failed to send in actual mock-ups of stuff, we've got to think about it as far as what the system's going to be able to do. So such a key component to this stuff too is, how is it actually going to do it? If we just tell, the coder to say, create me an M leader with this look, it's like, okay, so how does that actually work? So to think about it from the simplest steps, breaking things down into each little level. So what layer does that land on? Is there internal blocks? What blocks are defined? What are they named? How are they comprised? And then how does it actually put it together? So we even tested at the very simplest level of this was, okay, if I were to just type the mleader command, what are my options? Just doing this straight up the CAD workflow, how can I make this happen? So had to literally step through every single portion of that until we actually came up with something that actually worked. And then again, what he didn't mention, and I just looked at our little Google sheet that we had, is once we go, okay, that works. Now, where is it all affected? We actually had a Google sheet of 4 pages long accounting for any part that might be affected anywhere else. So verifications, highlights, labeling, schedules, anything that it could potentially affect, we needed to note it, just so that we were across the board safe. So just to go a little bit deeper there, but let's go ahead and see how that thing works then. So I've got a little plan here. You'll notice all these fun little spot elevations that I've placed. I've got a few already predetermined areas that I might want to throw specific slope differences in. But I also just ran a quick schedule here as it sits in the plan right now, so I can see my calculated square footage of these different areas throughout this little work area here. But how the tool works, and you'll again notice that in the site tab, we've got our slope area and slope callout and area tool that kind of gives you a little preview demonstration of what it's going to do. But on any one of these guys here, you'll see that we've now integrated that tool in, so that as you're doing any kind of plan, that you've got that tool right there accessible. They work the same, but we'll go ahead and pick that guy. So I think the most important thing, especially as you guys are poking around and seeing these new features, always look at the command line. The command line is going to be your best friend to see what options are actually there. So we can actually pick a slope call out, and now it says select a polyline or draw. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw an area real quick, and it'll just be, let's just say this area just like that. And so if I right click, it automatically will throw in that M leader with the new block, and it's locked just right onto that polyline boundary, and it matches the alignment of this and throws in the actual percentage or ratio there. So we'll go ahead and do another one here. I can pick this guy, pick that polyline, and it will throw it in. It'll progress the colors, and it'll drop that guy in there. So very, very quickly, you can start to see it's, whoops, I should actually click on the thing first, click on the line and put it in there. We got one more right here. Draw. This is the area that we wanted to cover. Just like that. So very, very quickly, we can get a sense of what areas that is going to affect. And as soon as the system recognizes those, we can go ahead and just run a new schedule here. Not going to regenerate. We'll pick this work area right here. And you'll notice the differences. Can we see that number there side by side? Right there, 608 to 628. So the system is going to calculate that additional square footage based on those slope numbers, which is really, really cool. And, you know, thinking about it further, we made these things non-plot so that you can leave them on the plan, but when you go to print, they're not going to show up. So they're just graphical representations for what you need. But you can also do a lay freeze that layer. And if you run the schedule, the counts will be as if those didn't exist. So very, very neat little function in there. So anything else you want me to show with that one, Jer?
Oh no, I think that's I think that was good. Yeah, let's show those other ones, because yeah, we're getting a lot of really good ones coming in, and I want to be able to address a lot of these ideas.
Okay, perfect. So the plant dialog box, picking a new plant. This one will be really quick, but pretty dang cool. So when you hit new, dialog box will pop up just like normal, but you're going to see it looks a little different. What's nice about this is we now have the ability to throw in filters and all kinds of different things. So it might look blank, but if you go ahead and click into the area, you will actually get different options. So it'll show you specific things here about the different plants and stuff like that, and it'll start limiting your stuff. So we'll go part shade, there's that, apply the filters. And what's cool about that is now this list is just about those filters. So you can go ahead and pick it, add it to the project. Looks a little different when it adds. It's a good notification. Clear those filters. If we go ahead and search for something, let's just say I'm looking for a Buxus right here. So it goes right to it just like it normally would, but we now have additional features here. So we can say, all right, do I want to look for the genus or common, or do I want to look for specifically the full name? And to have that, the system recalibrate so that it looks specifically for that item allows you to add it to the project and we can be done. So a lot more different features. This is still in the works right now, and we've just had a meeting yesterday, I believe, on some really, really cool additional features will be thrown in there. But yeah, I think there is a filter for the drought tolerant stuff in there, and we're going to continue to tag those plants as needed. So let's jump right over into circuiting. This is what a test file looks like, guys. Been going in and out of testing in these final stages here. So what you'll notice if you click on on the circuiting button or on the schematic when this gets released, this is the dialog box that's going to pop up now. So we can toggle between and have access to your schematic and your circuiting. What's neat about this is that your schematic zones aren't as you would typically remember them, you know, picking through that list and trying to filter through and what you're, you know, maybe not using in a specific project. They're all managed here in your preference set. So this list can be managed and you know, kept nice and tight. But when you go and add a new schematic type, you can actually just on the fly create whatever one you need or pick from that list that's in your preference set. So if you pick from this, it'll obviously fill out and pull that data in. But if you were to create a new one, you can fill it out, and it will just be added specifically to this project. It's nice. You can adjust the colors and everything here just as needed. And it does have a few additional cross checks in here now to make sure that you've filled out the proper stuff. So once that's added into here, you can see a nice little preview of the different colored zones and stuff like that. And you can place those as needed. So we can place him into these areas, and it's going to automatically throw in what that is. It's similar to the work area and the slope call out and stuff like that, where it matches the color of the zone now. So instead of it being potentially confusing, I'm sure those who have used it have seen numbers that have kind of stacked up on each other like this. If it's like very closely related, you don't know which number goes to what. Well, now it is very, very easy to see because it's got the leader, the color matches the hatches, and you're good to go. So that's your schematic stuff. And circuiting is even cooler. So the circuiting stuff, if we're going to show this off, we'll go a little bit backwards. We have the ability now to filter and group these together based on their flows, or largest to smallest, or the types, or just by zone. We can uncheck showing that color, which will allow us to take, and we'll just come over to this area here, take one of these guys here and drag it into a different location, and it's going to automatically update. Oh, of course it is. Probably because I did an all spray. Let's try that one more time.
Well, see, this is why it's in testing.
Look at that. It did update.
That's
you can
all
see
right.
my numbers changed here. Right?
That's all right. You got it. Yeah, that's all right. But it's got new things. That's all right.
It got new things.
It's all right. We got lots we want to go over with others. We don't need to go into every new feature here, but yeah.
All right. So anyways, I'll just summarize the stuff so you can see at a glance all the different types, the valve counts and stuff like that. So we'll stop there before I air out anything else. All right. Do you want to start reading those out, or where do we want to go with this, Jer?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Let's see here. Yeah, you just keep the screen there and stay in CAD. Oh my gosh, so many really great ideas from everybody. Like Jeff chimed in and mentioned that I bet that slope tool could be used to calculate the sloped roof area. Like, yep, you could do that with a ref node area. So that's an interesting one. Multiple people are looking for more line types. And so like if you go to the site ribbon and under line types, they want more line types. And to which I would say, what? You got to tell us what line type you're after. Go ahead and draw one. I mean, that's exactly how these got created. All of those line types, my dad drew them, and he goes, "Can you make a tool that does this?" So he didn't just say, "Hey, Jer, make line types." So that's the difference. And so I have a really perhaps at times too strict philosophy, but I don't feel a computer programmer should be making certain decisions. I feel the landscape architect should be, creating, leading the direction of things and assigning what layer something goes on, things like that. So that's why I always want a landscape architect involved with these things. But
with that, to go to Jeff's little question, just while we're on line types. Looking for additional ones for sanitation and electrical and stormwater, use this custom line types. If you have not used this is such an easy way to be able to do that. And so to be able to just assign a line type to the particular layer that you're on is super, super easy, and you can customize it and create any one that you want, and it'll save it. So that's a a really good one.
Yep. And then, like Earl chimed in here with saying, when you're replanting a natural area, is there a way to place the shrubs in a kind of more random natural pattern? And that's one we do have that noted in one of our wish list items. There's a couple issues, namely that we don't have a really good random number generator, but even I have had some uh, it, good improvements of it, but it needs to be a really good random number generator first of all, and then even then it's still then what, how does that basic algorithm work? That's a really head scratcher on what that works, because what's the other extreme, if it misfires, let's just assume that, let's assume this random shrub placement misfires. So you have all this engineering effort, right, that splays out these plants and it just looks wrong, right? Or if it or the shrubs keep getting placed on top of each other in some fashion. So it has a lot that can go wrong. Now, so basically, how do you design an algorithm like that? I would use trigonometry, and so I would say, given where the mouse cursor is, I would look at different angles from where the mouse cursor is and distances, and would do something with random numbers. But, helping us with what you think would work is great. You could say, here's an example of some random looking shrub placement. And I drew a bunch of lines and dimensions, and I calculated out a way that this could happen, at least that I think it would. I mean, you might be right, you might be wrong, but it's at least that brain effort spent on the problem that would really help us.
Yeah, I think along those lines, I think when we've done our areas like this and calculated for natural spacing and stuff, literally taking that kind of shape and going, okay, so this is what I think I want it to do, right? And it's just manually going, okay, if I'm fitting them in here and I'm doing this, like this is all that it takes to try to get us what it's, you know, trying to achieve and stuff like that. So just any kind of workflow and process that you did take for that is going to definitely help.
Yeah, and we've got Amanda chimed in saying that they would like to have the drip emitter assignment work on concept plant areas.
Mm,
And I was like, I can't remember why we didn't implement that, honestly, because that does seem like that would be like, back to that thing, that should be fairly easy to engineer. If the member plants have container sizes, there's no reason why it just simply can't work with them. So that's something that we should take a look at, because like I said, that I would say, because that doesn't need a new toolbar button. That's all existing functionality. That's just some code. And I would guess it's going to need about 50 to 100 lines of code. That's probably a 2 to 3 hour job at most. So another great example of, like, why don't we just implement that? And that is the crux of the problem, right? Look at all of these ideas that people have chimed in with. Which one should we do today? And you can't all just say mine.
you can, but that won't happen. Another one that might be as simple, or we've already had the discussion, Earl talking about adding that plant image back in, or the plant block symbol into the list. I know we've had back and forth on that one, Jer, on how does it show the preview, when they're looking at the plant blocks and stuff like that. Is it a preference setting? Is it, people have their own druthers from like a saving space issue, and I think that's what ultimately why we pulled it, right?
It is. Well, it definitely, the space issue is the critical one, because some people are going to be on let's say, what's our minimum size, but a 15-inch laptop, let's not worry about a 13-inch laptop. But I mean, our minimum screen size would be a 15-inch laptop. So how much, do you want this plant manager palette to get bigger? Because this is we're really close to minimum resolution here. But the other way to look at it is to go, well, fine, if I'm on minimum resolution, I'll have that preview turned off. But if I'm on my cavernous 27-inch monitor, why can't I have that preview there? And so, that's another way to look at it. And again, that's just fleshing out that idea and, thinking it through on how does this apply to all possible usage cases.
Yep.
And
All
let's see here. Oh
right,
my gosh, so many other ones here. Do you see any other ones that are, I mean, like I said, I think all of these ideas are great. And like, this is like what I'm saying, this is exactly our problem. And I'm hoping, I hope this inspires you all a lot, because like I said, all of these are great ideas. But again, how do you get that idea created? Treat your idea like a movie. How are you going to get a movie producer to make your movie idea? You're going to have to develop the idea a little. It's just that simple, and that will really help us. Because like this, I don't know, which one do you think we should do first, Jake? You're going to pick an irrigation item, I know you.
that's what I tend to go for. Yeah, for sure. Um,
And let's see.
oh,
Amanda had another good one where she said they typically label the drip areas with a little call out that indicates which valve serves it. And then she asked if she should send in an example, and I said, well, basically, absolutely, because that is kind of on our radar. We have mocked up a future tool to be able to label any piece of equipment in an irrigation plan. We're going to improve the valve call out button and let you click on literally any piece of equipment, and then it'll place in an appropriate call out for whatever it was you clicked on.
yeah,
And so this would fit in really well with that existing item. But we'd love to see what sort of call out you want it to look like. And then that's also part of our charge too. But we want to make sure you're going to be happy with it. But then the other effort that we would do is we need to make sure that call out doesn't look like a ref note or a plant label. It's got to be unique. It can't look like any other call out. And does it have, so how does it exactly correlate with the valve call out? So some things obviously on our end, but the part on your end is we want to make you happy. The worst thing we want is to engineer something and then you go, oh, that's not what I wanted it to look like.
right. Because we've got our valve and head call out that's different than our actual valve call outs, and how does that relate to other call outs that look similar and all that kind of stuff. But I think along that same line is when it just gets called out, how does it actually recognize what it's tied to? And I think that leads more to how our lighting call outs work, where we can place a transformer, place lights, place wire, tie them back. And now if I label the wire, it knows the transformer that it's hooked to. If it's a light, it knows what transformer it's hooked to. So I think it's very similar in that fashion, where we might have custom attributes that are, tagged in a certain way that if you've got that in your call out, it will read in that kind of information. Just
Exactly.
spitballing. But
Well, and actually, that part would really be pretty easy to engineer. But it's more the tricky part with that is just making sure it's in all the places in the code. So, like delete station needs to be sure to delete it as an example, And so there's just
move
making
piped
sure
equipment.
move piped equipment. It probably should, And so that's like I said, that's kind of that is the part that's more on our end. From the user, we just kind of want to see more of what they're after. Certainly. Here's another good one. If you have an example on that plan of some heads in a nice 90-degree corner, but just Jason happened to mention how he doesn't like how the quarter head tends to be pushed in a little more than the
Right.
half heads. And yeah, exactly. Jake and I would both laugh because we
We
know,
spent
or like
hours and hours and hours on that one. And it's a logic thing as far as how you want it to look. And I've put together a lot of different plans regarding what it would look like layout wise if I put this 12/2 on this line facing this way, right? And I place this 12/4 right here in the same corner facing this way. And because of what I might have on this quarter facing this way and a 12.5 right here facing this way, sharing that actual, oops, I didn't do a half, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Well, and
The
then the other one,
sharing of sides
the other
and
one to show is put in an adjustable with like a 45 degree, and that's really the crux of the issue. And so so the same logic also applies to this. So how much should that head be offset? See, because obviously in the quarter, you go, well, heck, see how it's bleeding off to the sides? Push it in. Well, look at that adjustable. Look at how far you would have to move that adjustable head in to have it not bleed out the sides. It would be, I
yeah.
mean, look at that. That's going to be 6, 7 feet pushed in. And so that's the puzzler, is how do we do it? And literally the best that I've ever been able to come up with is maybe the 90 degree should have unique logic that only applies to a 90 degree.
Right.
But maybe that's the solution. But those are the sorts of things. But yeah, right. So maybe we'll schedule a little breakout meeting. We'll go back to the drawing board on that one.
Yeah, but that's what it's doing, just from like understanding the logic, right? It's trying to fit it within its radius position so that it's not interfering with anything else around it. So that's what would happen if that logic stayed with, some of these things. So it's like, how far do you go
Exactly. That's a tricky
for
one.
that? So
and then Tyson chimed in with a shade calculation for parking lots, and then I said, well, what were you sort of thinking with that? And actually, I didn't even see his. I think he chimed back in with how he was thinking of having that work. But should it be in the plant schedule? Should it be its own tool? That's the tricky one. How would that work exactly? And does it need to be its own button? Does it need its own dialog box? And then in terms of those parking lot shade calculators, the one I've seen most commonly, unfortunately, I've seen no way to automate it, because there's the how much they count each tree for. And I've seen ones where they go, well, if a tree has any other tree overlapping it, it's not counted at full. It's counted on like a 1, 2, 3 basis. And the assignment of whether or not it's 1, 2, or 3, I've never been able to come up with how we would automatically do that. And so, but that's just an interesting one, because we've had multiple people in multiple jurisdictions who want that parking lot shade thing, but it varies by agency on what they require. And so, if we're going to engineer something, we want it to appeal to as many people as possible. And so that's one that, kind of, languishes, unfortunately, because we're like, well, I'm just not sure the best way to engineer this.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure you remember, I created a shade calculator Excel sheet that helped bridge that gap of, well, how do I calculate this stuff and what are my percentages and stuff like that, to where I came up with a workflow at one point of creating ref note items that had quarter, half, 3/4, full blocks that you could place over trees, at least get the counts for all of what you decide things should be, and then plug those into a spreadsheet that helps calculate things further. So
Exactly.
there's, just going back to your first slide of, is there a workaround? What is the time savings that, or even time spent on trying to calculate that versus what you can actually do a lot
Well,
quicker?
and then of course the real big one with that is it's going to look very much like our uniformity. So you irrigation users, that uniformity when you see that kind of flashing and doing its different calcs. It's comparing the overlapping areas of the heads, because that's what it needs to do, right? So if you did that for a parking lot, it's going to chug. It's going to have to chug a bit as it's overlapping the parking lot with the because it's only counting the shade that's falling on the parking lot, not on the the planted area underneath the tree. But to calculate all those overlapping, intersecting areas, it's going to sit there and just chug and chug and chug. And much like uniformity, I don't know if any of you may have attended, there was a webinar we did a long time ago when that came out. We showed that was 3 days of engineering. And after 3 full days of engineering this, we tried it out, and it took about 7 to 10 minutes per zone. And it was like, well, what do you do at that point? Do you just call it a loss? But ended up, okay, rewrite the whole function differently to try to do it differently. And so, again, that's something where, unless there's a simpler way to do it, but how do you decide if that tree is calced as half quarter, 3/4, or full? That's the real magic in it. And any assistance on how to do it is always appreciated.
Lessa, it would be great to have an acre feet water rights use calculator or calculation schedule. I think that might go right into ag stuff, what we're talking about from like our additional.
Well, and that too, just, I mean, yeah,
calculators.
send that on over, because, absolutely, please, Lessa, go ahead and just send us, what does one of those look like? And I bet we could match it, because it sounds like it's going to be just no different than anything else. It's just going to be pulling one of our, all the existing data, and then just displaying it with acre feet.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the chat from Steve Jer. If you wanted to maybe try to address that, I'm not familiar with.
We do have, I mean, we do have that already. So we have our schedule output. So from preferences, you can configure a schedule or an additional external provider, and it's still initial. It's over in general.
Yeah, I know. I thought I had one
Oh.
set up, but I think I
Oh.
cleared it out. So.
Oh, but yeah.
again.
So here in our schedule integration, you can, and we're working on this currently. That's part of the landscape hub integration is going to be using this. So we need to add some more capability to this for the authentication and other things. But basically what it'll do is this will send that schedule to that API, or to that cloud provider, and then go from there. So that's all currently there. Just kind of the thing is would need to know that cloud provider. We need to know what sort of format they need it in, but that's, so the engineering is really, frankly, more on their end than ours. So, we already have the ability to, to post this. Just need to know what format does it need to post in, and would go from there. But yeah, definitely those sorts of integrations with other cloud providers is a great idea, and definitely something that we want to pursue. And let's see any other. I think we covered almost all of them here, right, Jake?
Yeah, I think
We should have been
I
marking them
noticed.
off, because these are all
I've
so.
been trying to. Jeff had a decent one that I think might even be covered with our import CSV thing. So he's talking about a way to take data from a collector, say tree inventory, import it directly into a DWG. So they use geolocation, pull it into GIS, stuff like that. So it sounds like if they can get you those points in those lat long position stuff, or what is it in? Is it in lat long?
Well, and that's the big one right there. Is so there's I mean, and just in general, just a quick note on that is lat and long support in land effects, because obviously you might get a survey of existing something, right? And so The thing is to convert from lat long into your coordinates is this rather involved equation. It's not proprietary though. It's even, it's on Wikipedia and I've seen it. It is involved, and it would require uh, engineering that, basically reverse engineering that translator, that to go from lat long to your coordinate, you have to indicate what your coordinate system is and what your origin point is, and then run these complicated calculations. Meanwhile, those are available in Civil 3D. So that is the other possibility, is we could engineer lat long support only if you're running Civil 3D, and that could actually be engineered very, very quickly. So that's one of the classic examples, some of the challenges that we have in assessing a wish list item.
Cool. I think it is right on the dot.
Yeah,
If you
time.
guys have any other questions or thoughts, again, please send those into a tech support ticket, shoot them over to us, and give those mock-ups, give a little bit more of an explanation of what those are, show us examples of the plans that you've kind of put together and what you're doing currently. All of that's going to definitely help aid in us understanding the item and being able to prioritize and figure out where that actually lands. So
Absolutely. Yep, that would really help. But just a huge heartfelt thank you, you guys. These are really good ideas. This is what we thrive on. And yeah, please, let's flesh out those ideas, get a priority level to them, and let's try to implement as much as we can here. And I hope we really did inspire you and give you the tools you need so that you can collect and hone your wish list, so that, like I said, it shouldn't be just a wish list. It should actually be a feature that gets done that has your name on it. I mean, that's the goal, right? And we want to really let you know that that is possible, and that can happen. So,
awesome.
yeah, on that, hey, let's call it. And hey, everyone, have a safe and fantastic weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.